Hello, welcome to another episode with Connecting the Community with Chris. I'm so honored to have two special guests with me today. Cara Gardner, a wealth management advisor at North Coast Wealth Management, and Sam Lebowski, as an experienced attorney from the Lebowski Law Firm. Welcome. Cara has over 20 years of experience in the financial services, and Sam also has specializes in the law pertaining in the senior care community. Cara guides her clients through difficult economic challenges, as well as Sam and his law firm, including related issues to long term care planning, nursing home planning, estate planning, and most important, trusts. So today we wanted you to learn about Cara and also Sam today. So Cara, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences and how you got started.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I have a degree in business from the Eli Broad School at Michigan State University, and I spent my first 10 years of my career in banking in a variety of roles before becoming an independent advisor a little over 13 years ago. And so now I'm with a great firm here in Farmington Hills. Thanks for coming to see us here today. And my team has a vast depth of knowledge between the advisors and our full-time staff. And so we really have a great group to help our clients with a variety of needs. So thanks for having me.
That's great. Thank you for being here. And Sam, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you and tell us about your history and your family law firm that you have.
Of course. So as I like to say sometimes myself and my family run the Lebowski law firm. As I joke around, it takes two to tackle the one of my father. He's the boss man, the lead attorney and CPA in the office. I went the attorney route. My brother went the CPA route. We just manage practices on different floors of the building. I solely specialize in estates and trust, being drafting of those documents, administering those documents, and assisting with long-term care, preservation of assets, placement in nursing homes, issues like that, as we call that, our crisis planning in the office. I have a vast experience as well with VA work, dealing with aid and attendance and pension, mainly as we do now. But we're glad to be here and be able to speak and kind of weave in and out of these different topics that will relate to the estate planning area as well as are so heavily related to your financials and your financial advisor, who that may be as well.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you being here. I know it's really important for all of us to be part of the community. What's really important in the community is that we all come together. I know that with Cara and also Sam, we are part of a group called the Senior Compass Group. And so what we do is we're advocates in the community and we let the community ask us questions. And also we are there to be able to go over specific topics that are important, that are valuable, that we know that our community will face. So first question today I really want to know is what is important regarding estate planning on both sides, whether the financial side and the attorney side, when our community is preparing for that.
Well, I think one question I get often before I refer clients to Sam is, do I need an estate plan, right? A lot of people will say, who is necessarily someone who needs that type of planning? And it's pretty much most people, right? If you're an adult, there are a few key things that you should have. But from my client standpoint, especially if you have a little bit more complicated situation, maybe you've been through a divorce, maybe you have a blended family now, perhaps you um, have a child that has special needs, somebody that we have to care for through adulthood, things like that. Those types of things, maybe properties in different states are especially sensitive and something that I would want you to contact someone like Sam to talk about. So
Mhm.
it definitely affects most adults, but some more so importantly than others.
So, but I'm assuming some of those documents need to be legalized too, as well, but also organized in a fashion so that way family members feel comfortable having these important topics to discuss. That's why I want to know Sam is that when she is talking with her families, how would you step in and tie in?
Usually, Cara, as a good rule of thumb, is to win somebody may or may not need to seek some counsel on the estate planning. And as she said, which she's correct, usually a majority of people need some type of planning. We like to say at the office, nobody has a crystal ball. I've saw clients very young who could have benefited from some planning, and some who are very old who could have benefited from some planning. And it's just a matter of if somebody has the assets and the knowledge and the concern, they should certainly seek somebody for that reason alone. Don't let it be too late, and at least see if you need to do something simple like a power of attorney, or you need to do something more advanced like a trust and just kind of be guided and counseled through the different ins and outs of the estate planning realm, the beneficiary designation rules, TOD rules, things like that, to really ensure that your assets go to who you want to after death, usually preferably without probate court intervention.
Do
And
you have anything to add about
yeah,
that?
and typically I can help with kind of what Sam was saying, those transfer on deaths or designated beneficiaries. Some things can be a little bit more simple, right? We've got an account. I can put a direct beneficiary and a contingent one on an IRA for someone. But it can get more complicated than that. Your property, your home. Do you own a home in another state? Do you have a vacation home? Those kinds of things tend to need more. But really, even besides just the financial assets and making sure all of that goes where it wants, we have problems with it. I have to pay attention to my client's capacity, right? And are they still capable of making all these important decisions on their own? Does somebody else need to be involved? Those kinds of things really aren't just about the finances, but are about their overall well-being. And so where Sam is always helpful is those powers of attorney and other things where family members can come in and kind of help out.
Yeah, and I see that that difficult conversation could happen on both parties. If family members, I always see is on my side is that they don't disclose everything, and so they're very private about their finances, especially with their kids, depending on the relationship. But I know that when it comes down to also one to discuss is wills and who should consider to have a will and when is it? Is there a certain demographic, age to have this discussion? We'll start with Sam with that question.
We'll touch on this a little bit as well when we go towards one of the questions later on today. But somebody who should consider a will kind of falls in that same category. Who should consider some estate planning. Now, as a lot of people aren't aware of, the will only gets read through probate court, and probate court is only generally ever used or needed when there's assets left in somebody's sole name without a beneficiary, without a joint owner, and or without it being titled, and it being the asset titled into that individual's trust. So as I like to say, sometimes for younger individuals in particular, you take a look at the default rules, who your assets would pay to if you did not have a will, because the legislature has surely made up those laws and has ultimately made those decisions for you if you passed away, as we say, intestate, without a will or other document indicating where your assets go. And sometimes people are completely fine with that, and sometimes they want the exact opposite of that. Now, having said that, that's not a reason to do or to not do a will, or to do some planning or not do some planning, but at least be aware of what those rules are to start that conversation and to get into the mode of whether you should be doing this planning or not.
Mhm.
Usually, if somebody's dealing with Cara and they're picking and choosing beneficiaries to where they're wanting charities, small percentages, they're nitpicking it, as we sometimes say. That's usually a good chance that that person needs a will, a trust,
Mhm.
some real estate planning documents to make sure that not only my job or the attorney's job during life and afterlife is smooth, but that the financial advisor's job is smooth. So they're not in a position to where they're having to go through these various assets
Mhm.
and pick multiple different beneficiaries, whether you have one landing spot, one
Yeah.
will or trust of where things would go after at the end of the day.
And it helps the children too. Most important when your parents pass, obviously you want a controlled situation, especially if your parents have assets to be able to divvy up with each individual child too. That can be very difficult for them to be able to even have control over it without having proper documentation. But let's talk about the financial side of the will side. How is it on your end when you're speaking with family members about that?
Yeah, well, like Sam mentioned, I can uh, be helpful to the point of the assets themselves. And sometimes we can designate just about everything you have for a beneficiary or payable on death bank accounts, um, transfer on death, things like that. But occasionally there are things outside of that that would fall into a category where if you'd like to avoid probate and the additional cost of it, that's where Sam can come in and help the families have things in order so that they don't need to get that far because there are businesses, right? So a lot of business owners, there needs to be some thought given to succession planning, given to, is my son going to take over the family business? does he want to, is he capable of,
Mhm.
am I going to sell it to him? Am I going to just,
Yeah.
so all those kinds of things,
IRAs, mutual
you
funds.
may assume some things, but without any legal documentation or planning put behind it, it can leave things kind of up in the air. And now if your children are married and, something happens to you and did the spouse have a different opinion and not want them to take the business? I mean, you really want to kind of have some of those things put together, and that's where estate planning can help a lot. So definitely business owners would be another big category to consider.
So, what considered plans now are addressed? For example, say, no, we talked about, we just briefly just talked about medical planning and financial planning, but end of life care, and there's end of life care decisions that we've discussed briefly right now, and end of life planning, such as funeral and burial plans. So, during these times, what I get for both of you is for the public to understand is that have the discussion way ahead of time because they're going to be very difficult to happen when your mom and dad pass away. These difficult conversations are hard, but also too do you have any insight on uh, any of the topics that have to do with medical, financial, end of life care advice for the public?
Mhm.
Let's start with Sam.
So I'll kind of segue into that by referencing the various documents that get included in an estate plan, quote unquote, and that being a trust or not, always a will, a power of attorney for financial matters, a power of attorney for healthcare matters, called numerous different things. Previous used to be called a living will. Now it's called a patient advocate under Michigan law, medical directive, all the same document. You'll get the HIPAA authorization to be able to speak with the doctors freely. And I never thought that was actually needed with spouses until you see it with your eyes, them being withheld information like that. And funeral representative documents indicating that if you do not pass away with a prepaid, prearranged funeral, that you have some type of document appointing that person or entity to make such a decision for you. Now within there, you have various different plannings. You have the financial planning, which usually occurs after or in the midst of the estate planning, drafting the documents, and that is dealing with your financial advisor, making sure you have a list of your assets, you're aware of what they are, what tax status, etc., to be able to really give your attorney the best and fullest picture to make the proper advice. Now, if somebody has a large amount of assets, it's going to change my opinion versus if they have very consolidated and one or two assets. My advice and opinion changes with regards to the trust and different power of attorneys that might be in there, or the powers that would be within those power of attorney documents.
Mhm.
That's more the financial side, dealing with the trust and the financial power of attorneys. You have the healthcare, so you're dealing with end of life decisions, whether you'd want DNRs, life support, things like that. And in the midst of that, you always have the conversation of who's going to be that individual. I know you likely see this, firsthand more than I do, of who is that person who's going to care for you and whether they're making that right decision. And
Mhm.
that comes into play ever so often, as well as that same decision with the financial. And I'm sure Carr sees that as well with a document that's often confused with and for financial power of attorney, but that they have, and I'll let her speak about this, they have a trusted contact. And then that allows you as the account holder to appoint a trusted contact to ultimately, I think, speak on your account, and it's really to prevent undue influence, fraud, things like that. And Carl will kind of touch on that and some of the ambiguity that she sees with the individuals or clients' thought on that document versus financial power of attorney, which are completely different and independent documents and ideas there.
Yeah, a lot of people probably are asked when they open accounts for assigning a trusted contact. And generally, what that's for is for myself or advisors to kind of look out for our clients, right? As we age, unfortunately, there are people out there that try to take advantage of your situation. And so, if I am concerned about a client's well being, or I'm worried because they didn't show up for an appointment we had scheduled, or something like that, I would have somebody, usually a family member, that I could reach out to and say, hey, mom or dad or whomever was supposed to be here, or I'm a little concerned about this caregiver. All of a sudden, they're, calling me all the time, things that are sort of strange, right? Anything I notice, their bank account has this added person now. Do we know who that is? Etc. So that's what a trusted contact is, but that's not a person that can sign forms for mom and dad, that can make distributions, that can make investment decisions. That's different. That's a power of attorney. You definitely need something separate if you would like someone to be able to help and do actual financial transactions for you. You need to maybe be added to a bank account or perhaps just transfer on debt, depending on what makes sense for you, which is something Sam can help you with. The other thing that always comes up, I feel like, on the financial side is estate liquidity. You know, if you've drafted a will and you have a trust and we've funded all of the assets properly and everything's set up correctly, we need to know what the plan is, right? When something happens, we need to pay X dollars to this person, or this person or persons gets the property or what have you. And, you know, I need to be mindful of what types of investments you're in, what tax consequences there are, depending on the type of investment, to make sure that we can actually fund and fulfill your wishes
Yeah.
in your afterlife, documents. So estate liquidity is something we
We'll,
consider as
we'll
well.
often work hand in hand with Cara and other financial advisors that clients may have to ensure that once their trust is established, that their trust isn't just established, but it's funded. And a good analogy I like to use is it's a garage. It's a garage that your lawyers built that has all of the specs and particulars, that fancy door that you wanted, but it's only protecting the things that you put in that garage. And once a trust is signed and dated and you leave my office, it's likely not funded with anything other than your property, your personal property, but your bank accounts, IRAs, everything else that you may have is kind of outside of that garage and is not protected yet. Now, the job as the client, with the attorney's help and generally with your financial advisor's help, when you have somebody like Cara who's familiar with these rules and the ins and outs of trusts, you have them help you park that car in the garage, put those assets in the trust, or list that trust as the beneficiary. And that makes for a very smooth transition from the lawyer's office to the financial advisor's office to home, to where you're happy and comfortable and you understand your plan as a whole.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both for giving that insight. That's really important. Conversation that a lot of our family members face in the home. So, if anybody has any comments about that, who is viewing, please leave them below. Now, I would like to talk about who would be a good candidate for a living trust. Please.
Cara kind of mentioned it earlier, and she kind of hit the nail on the head there with regards to people, and this is that people will can, in certain circumstances, can deviate from this, but almost 99% of the time, the individuals who have blended families, who have family businesses or minor children or various properties not in this state, almost 100% need a trust. There's really no other way to properly plan
Mhm.
to accomplish your goals but without a trust. And the most common I see
What
are
type of
blended
trust?
families.
Another question I'd like to ask is
Hmm?
what type of trusts are out there?
The most common type of trust, and we'll stick to the more basics for this today. The most common type of trust that we'll see is a revocable trust. So a trust that somebody like yourself or like Cara, as the grantor of that trust, would be able to change, amend, revoke throughout your lives, include additional people, remove additional people, etc. And only after your passing would those assets begin to be distributed. Would that trustee who you name begin to take charge? And in certain instances, with regards to Medicaid planning, VA planning, or other long term care planning, we will deal with irrevocable trusts, not to be confused with the trusts that we're speaking about that Cara or Chris would have. But an irrevocable trust is generally if you're divesting yourself. And we'll likely save that for a different day. But that's if you're doing some advanced Medicaid planning, some advanced tax planning, etc. And the big difference from an irrevocable trust to a revocable is when somebody gifts money to an irrevocable trust, they're ultimately giving up control of those funds,
Mhm.
generally set in the type of trust that we deal with.
And it takes it
Thank you,
out of
Sam.
your estate, your gross
Correct.
estate after you pass. And that's something that, depending on your assets, it's kind of falls onto either outlier, like you mentioned, it may be on the lower side of investable assets that or Medicaid planning. But if you have a higher net worth as well, we may be doing some, gift tax concerning, we work out a plan prior to your death, or we do some irrevocable trust planning to try to help that. Those numbers constantly change. Right now, it's still a pretty large situation from a gift tax amount that you can
Yeah.
gift, but that may sunset in 2026 unless Congress makes it permanent. So, there are definitely things that change. I know Sam,
Is there a minimum amount of gift
yeah, so right now it's a little over
tax?
12 million per person.
Mhm.
Um, but it used to be 5 million. And, there's unlimited spousal deductions and things like that. But, if it goes from 12 as a, you know, couple, you could be 24
Mhm.
back down to 5 and 5 and 10. That's a
Yeah,
big
it's a big
difference.
difference. Yeah.
There are some people that could potentially fall in the middle of that. And, as assets continue to grow and inflation happens, I know those
Yeah.
numbers sound
Is
kind of
that
big, but
non-taxable gifts? So if it's given, not tax on that amount.
well, there's a whole
Yeah.
calculation too.
I think we'll talk about that in another
Yeah.
topic, guys.
Basically
But
saying up to a certain point when you're
yeah,
so
Yeah.
wealthy,
yeah,
the IRS comes in and tax you very heavily.
Yes,
And in
it's a
those
it's a big tax.
situations, which the law is ever so changing, in those situations, you do irrevocable trust to get those assets out of your estate to ultimately pay least amount of taxes at the end
yeah.
of the day. And we do a lot of that planning as well.
That's
with
why you
very
have an
certain
attorney to
parameters.
be able to handle that type of scenario.
And I think why you need to revisit your plan.
Yeah,
Sam
the
and I
plan.
talk a lot. I'll meet with clients. Oh yeah, I took care of all of that. Well, 15 years ago, you know.
And on that point, 15 years ago, that plan might have been proper and you might have had the certain type of trust for that plan.
But
But
things
now
change.
with the asset level and the tax level being so high,
Yeah,
it's unnecessary. And you usually want to have the spouse continue on with the assets with no checks or balances, which is exactly what that type of planning does not allow.
mhm. Now, can you architect the type of each client that you guys typically have for each other? For let's talk about with Cara. Now, you're sitting with somebody they need financial planning.
Mhm.
First, is that I have a two-part question. Is that what age group are individuals coming to you and talking to you about your services? And then also architect what each client typically is coming and discussing with you.
Yeah, I mean, my average client is probably somewhere around 50, but I obviously have younger clients and older clients. And there are different situations that need to be addressed at different points in your life, obviously. So some of my younger clients, it's things more like, do they have children? Do we need to create some guardianship situations? What would happen? Where does the money go? And then who's in charge of it on the behalf of our children if something should happen to the two of us? And I know a lot of times people think, well, there's one of us here and one of us. But if you get in a car with your spouse at any point in time, this is something that needs to be addressed. So a lot of times with the younger side, do we have life insurance? Things like that, those early planning type of things. And then on the older side, it's more the conversation. Are you having these later in life financial conversations with your adult children now, if you're an older client, or your other family members? A lot of my single adult clients who maybe don't have children, they're often people I refer to Sam because there isn't a clear cut, if they've got three brothers and parents and own property in two states, and all of a sudden, who does that go to and how? And,
Yeah.
so those types of people, who makes the medical decisions, who do I want mom or dad to do it, or do I want my brothers to do it, and those types of things come up, especially with some of my clients planning alone. So I try to, be that
Mhm.
planning
Or
partner
someone
and
getting married too,
yeah,
that now they're gonna
married.
have.
That's the other thing about the timing. If you haven't checked your stuff in 10, 15 years, sometimes maybe your kids have had changes. Maybe one of your children is divorced and
Mhm.
did you just put your child's name on there or was it and
Yeah. How
other
many times
things
we've
or
been at meetings together and even someone would ask you to revise their plan too for them.
Mhm.
Something that was in there that they did like 20 years ago.
Mhm.
You
the
know.
laws change too, like Sam was saying. So, it's just often a good idea to take a look at that every so often.
No, what would you architect the type of client that you have an age group that discuss about, these important topics that we're discussing today?
I deal with different age individuals. Probably the average age of my clients is 45, 50 or so. But I deal with clients who are dealing with the loss of their mom or dad as young as 18, 19, 20. And I deal with people who are doing estate planning as young as 20, 21, 22. And you'd be amazed at how good these, and I say this varies ever so lightly because I'm a kid myself, how good these kids are saving because they're doing a great job. And it's kind of nice to do that type of planning as well because just like Cara mentioned, they have no spouse, they have no kids, they maybe have a mom or dad who are well off and they're not going to provide for them, and they're planning otherwise who they're going to give money to is interesting. Maybe some charities, friends, family, a mix of things, and it gets to be interesting. And in the inverse, with regards to those younger individuals helping or administering mom or dad's estate, it's nice to see them and kind of advise them to see somebody like Cara, see somebody to make sure that money does you more benefit than it would a detriment.
Yeah, and so if you what is typically included in an estate plan? I guess we'll start out with on Sam, since you're discussing it. What's the whole process of that?
So I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but you'll get all the power of attorneys, the will, a trust if one would be applicable for you. You get the HIPAA authorizations, a document allowing to make funeral decisions, a deed for the property, and I think some of the other documents are somewhat ancillary, but relate to personal property assignments, allowing you to specifically devise, as we say, personal effects,
Mhm.
anything sentimental. And then usually at the end of it, we'll prefer that a client is dealing with somebody like Cara. They have a nice spreadsheet of assets, and at that meeting, we give the financial advisor a call.
Mhm.
She now has that trust name. She now has that trust date,
What
and
would
that
you
will
have?
start being implemented in the person's plan. And Carl will kind of talk about that once somebody has a trust.
Yeah, what is on your side? What does it look like?
Yeah, well, like Sam was saying, funding the trust, putting something in the garage is kind of the important piece, and that's typically what I can help with. Once the estate attorney has taken a good care and put together the plan, now we have to name things, right? So if you've got IRAs or you have non-retirement accounts or bank accounts or whatever it is, we have to decide, is it best suited to go from one spouse to the other spouse and then the trust? Or do we just name the kids? Does he want the trust on the contingent on the non-qualified dollars, not necessarily on the retirement dollars? Because there are tax implications and benefits for some of these different types of assets. So it may not necessarily be blanket that the trust goes on everything.
Mhm.
So usually Sam and I work together, and knowing the client well at this point, we've both met with them many times. Usually we can say, okay, I think let's put this in the name of the trust. This one is spouse to spouse, and then the kids,
Mhm.
whatever, depending on the client's situation and the capacity of the kids and the age and stuff like that.
And there's two type of financial power of attorneys too, as well too. There's healthcare, and then there's also financials too.
So
So
there's
there's
two
two.
different power of attorneys, one being a healthcare, one being a financial.
Yep.
Usually, in addition, what we like to do with HIPAA authorization as well, although inferred in that one document, one of the power of attorneys, it's always good to have that separate independent document for HIPAA release.
Yeah, I know a lot of people wait to be able to get that document until later on in life, but they can do that at any time, I'm assuming.
They certainly can. And it's usually better too. So you're not having to send myself and one of the other attorneys down to do, as Cara somewhat alluded to do capacity checks to make sure that person is still able and competent and not being unduly influenced, things like that, because that can be a hurdle in and of itself, and it only opens up possible issues if there's family animosity, and we see that often, and we're seeing that now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I really appreciate you guys and your time really so much about discussing these important topics that we face with our family members and in the community. I just wanted to go with both of you guys. Any closing statements and advice that you can give to anyone about today's topic?
I would just say, don't be afraid to have the conversations with your family, right? It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, but you can just know that you're doing it from a place of love, right? And it's really going to make things simpler. It will save you money. It can save heartaches, all kinds of things. To just do a little bit of time and planning ahead can really just, improve the situation for everyone left behind.
And thank you, Carl, for being on our show.
Of course, thanks for having me.
And the advice I would give, and I see this often, do a deep dive and have a conversation with your loved one, your family, your professionals that you deal with. Figure out where do you want things to go and what do you have. I often see individuals who aren't dealing with somebody like Cara, and they're ever so unfamiliar with what they have, what it's in, where it's at, and even how to transition it in the midst of this. And that's never a good sign. That's never a good sign. So just get a plan, and what that plan is, just make sure you have one.
Get a plan and start early. That's what really the consensus of this whole podcast show is. Everybody, if you have any questions or comments, please leave it below. Also, too, is they're accessible at any time. If you can go on our Affinity Senior Care website page, and we have our resource page, you can go ahead and find information to contact Sam Lebowski and also Cara Gardner as well. Thank you so much for being on our show. Until our next topic, and we'll see you all again.